Hi, this is Kevin Kraut. I'm Ogden Kraut's son. And I have an interesting story here I want to share with you. This experience happened with me when I was young. I used to go over and pick up the telephone, and I would actually hear, it was the Dugway Proving Grounds where we grew up, and I would actually hear this kind of like a talking or something on the other end of the telephone. And I started kind of wondering what it was, and I would motion to my mother, and she'd come over and lift up the receiver, and it wouldn't be there anymore. She kind of thought I was kind of nuts. Well, one day I picked it up, and I motioned to my mother to come over, and she lifted it up, and she heard some talking on the phone, and she started talking, and she said, "Hello, hello," and all of a sudden she heard this voice on the other end, and it said, "Oh no, it's Sister Kraut." And that really upset my mom, because that kind of showed that the church may be tapping our family's phone line. And so she took the phone and threw it clear across the room and just shattered the phone into pieces. She was that upset. Anyway, that got kind of out because my father was kind of a well-known figure. You know, he had written several books. There were a Deseret book and was well known. And at the time that Marky Peterson and several others were kind of starting to investigate Dad as his fundamentalist beliefs were beginning to come out. And so anyway, that information got into Jerald Tanner, the Lighthouse Ministry of the Anti-Mormons, and kind of upset Dad that his name was associated with anti-Mormons. So what he did was he called up Jerald one day and he said, "Jerald, I want to make sure that you don't ever have my name in any of your materials ever again. I just don't want my name associated with that. I'm very pro-Mormonism, you're very anti-Mormonism, and I want to keep that kind of clearly defined that way." And Jerald says, "Well, you know, it happened, it was a real thing, I'm going to go ahead and keep it." And Dad said, "Listen, Jerald," he said, "if you don't take it out, I will sit down at my typewriter and I will expose all the lies and all the things, and I'll go through the archives and I will prove beyond a doubt, and I will put you out of business." And he said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Kraut, you probably could do that. I will make sure that that's not in there any further." And so consequently, Jerald kind of got out of that and made sure my dad's name wasn't in there any longer. What's interesting is that Dad came in one day to Jerald's, and they kind of had this interesting love-hate relationship with each other. And Dad came in, he says, "You know, Jerald," he said, "it's interesting, we have a lot in common." And he says, "Ugh." And he goes, no, really, we both study Mormonism, we both print, you know, stuff on Mormonism, we're both kind of hated by the church, we're both this, we're both that." And he said, "But there's one major difference between you and I." And Jerald says, "What's that?" He said, "Well, you don't believe any of it, and I believe all of it." And Jerald went, "Ugh," you know, and so it's kind of interesting story on that. Jerald made a statement one time. He said, he came in and Dad, he says, "Ogden," he says, "you know," he says, "kind of interesting." He says, "If there is any truth to Mormonism, the fundamentalists have it." So there you go.